Reed, I want to talk to you first about like the creation, the beginning of Netflix, because I love this story. Tell me kind of when the moment was you said, there's a better way to do this, and what that epiphany was.
Well, I got hosed by Brian's movie, Apollo 13. So I rented that movie from Blockbuster a long time ago, and I forgot to return it.
Wow. Okay, I didn't know that was a catalyst.
There we go. And it was a $40 late fee. And I remember it because I was so embarrassed about it, I didn't want to tell my wife. And about a year later, my then company, I was running a tech company, got acquired. I was looking for something to do. And that was just one of those incidences that stuck with me of, this clearly got to be a better way.
Yeah.
And so that was the genesis of Netflix. And when we started, we knew, look, DVDs, a great digital packet, it's got 5 gigabytes on it, and you can mail it overnight. But eventually, the internet would be fast enough to stream. And it took a lot longer than we thought. Our business plan in '97 said, in 5 years, half our business will be streaming. And we got to 2002, and it was 0% of our business. And we said, well, in 5 years, that was when we went public in 2002. We said in 5 years, half our business will be streaming. And we got to 2007, and 0% of our business was streaming. But then the third time we made the prediction, it more than came true. We said 5 years, half our business will be streaming, and by 2012, it was 80%.
Wow.
So it just shows you, if you have something dumb and you say it long enough, it becomes smart.
Well, the thing that I also love is that one of the inspirations for you was a gym, and that people will go to the gym, and every month they'll pay a membership fee, even if they don't go to the gym. And I feel like for a long time, until Netflix streaming kicked in, I had this amazing thing that I would get movies from once in a while that I would forget to return, that I would find stacked underneath all the other movies on my table that I hadn't sent back, that I was still paying for every month. How many people were like me until once streaming kicked in? Because now I use it all the time. Now I watch Netflix constantly on my Apple TV. It is literally a part of my life every day.
Yeah, streaming's just so much easier. It's click and watch.
Yeah.
It's the amazing thing that, frankly, YouTube pioneered. And the advantage of click and watch is you just don't have to think. You don't have to think about files and downloading and all these other things. And you might have seen that recently BitTorrent, which is the major way that piracy happens in the United States, and is down significantly in network traffic, which is just showing that if we provide online, make it easy in streaming, it can be like bottled water, and that piracy is going down.
Brian, how is this type of technology, streaming technology, affected what you guys do at Imagine?
How does it? Well, it affected it in a very positive way because they put Arrested Development back in the air.
Yeah.
You put it on the air. We wrote a check.
All right. Okay. But actually, I met Reed probably almost 20 years ago. Had I had the vision to invest in Reed, I would have been a billionaire today. But what he does is amazing. It's the most amazing thing. I produced the TV series 24, but that was before we didn't have any vision about that. It would be about binge viewing would be relevant or important. But he did. He had this vision, and I think kids want to experience binge. They want to experience television shows that way. They want to experience movies that way, and it'll have a profound effect on the movie business and right now on the television business.
I mean, that's a big thing that now you guys are putting all your shows up at one time. That's trickling over to other online platforms. Yahoo is launching all of their programming all at once. How many more people do you think are going to be influenced kind of by that way of doing things? Do you think HBO will follow suit, or HBO is going to say, no, that's the Netflix model, this is our model, we want to continue these water cooler conversations that people talk about?
Well, 200 years ago, a lot of fiction was written for magazines. It was a serialized format for novels, and then book manufacturing got cheap enough where you could make a book and sell it at a reasonable cost, and then people got control of all 13 chapters they could read on their own schedule. And that greatly outcompeted the serialized release model of the then historic magazines.
Yeah.
And I think we'll see the same thing, which is more and more consumers want control. They want freedom. Occasionally they binge, and that makes a great story. But most of the time it's just a single episode, like you read a chapter of a book. And we'll see chapters that are variable length, like TV shows. Instead of having 22 minutes for every episode, you can go 30 minutes and 16, depending on the natural rhythms of the story. So I'm sure that will take off, and the major networks, look, the broadcast networks adapted to the expansion of cable networks very well, and that's what we'll see with cable networks. They'll all become internet networks. They'll do a lot of these release patterns because it's what consumers want. They want control, and they want to be able to watch things. They can watch more that way because they can watch on their own schedule.
When you guys develop material at Netflix, how much of the stuff you guys are developing, like the House of Cards of the world, are kind of related to the information you gather from the algorithms of people's watching habits, their viewing habits, what they like? How much of that influence like the creation of a House of Cards or your new shows?
Well, a lot, because we get a lot of viewing history, so we can take bets that other people might not want to take. Because the show creators, they'll bid it out to multiple networks, as they should. Mm-hmm. And then what we're able to do is analyze what we think, how it will perform, if it's well done, within our network. And then we can come up with a higher bid than anyone else for certain types of shows. And so it gives us a lot of confidence. And that's been fantastic for us on Arrested. Of course, we had seasons 1 through 3, so that helped a lot.
Yeah. So here's this scientific algorithm that's helping to kind of influence creativity, Brian. From your standpoint, with what you guys do, how do you kind of see the difference between your businesses?
Well, our businesses merge in that, well, first of all, I've known Reed, as I said, for almost 20 years. Yeah. He's one of these very unique people that he actually not only cares about this business that he's doing and had a vision about it, but he completely respects storytellers. And we, as creators and writers and producers of stories, can sense that. We can intuit that. And so his place in the community is very vital beyond just the hardware side of it. It's that his sensibility is such that he respects storytellers. So when we did Arrested Development or House of Cards, which we didn't do, I think what they do is they analyze whether it's a story that they're interested in telling and whether the foundational ingredients are people that make sense in terms of the compatibility to the story itself. And then they just bet on it. They don't micromanage the process. They are friendly to the process. They're creative within the system, and they're not intrusive in any way. And so that has an effect on, it's like a butter effect on people that want to participate with Netflix, are ones that really, believe in their product, and it just works really well.
What fuels the creativity within Imagine?
Well, I mean, I had this discipline. What happened is my first movie that I actually made was called Splash, and it was about a man falling in love with a mermaid. And I just every one of the movies that I make, I kind of do it from the first person point of view. So in that case, I just thought to myself, what would it be like to meet the perfect woman? And then I created the definition of what the perfect woman would be to me. And then I superimposed this mythological sort of symbol on it, which heightened it, and it became a mermaid and was called Splash. So basically what I personally do is I start with imagine this or what if that. And it begins with sort of these ignition questions like that. And then I also have this discipline of meeting people that are expert or renowned in anything other than the movie business. So it could be science, medicine, technology, politics, every art form. And I've done this for 27 years. Every 2 weeks, I would go meet somebody that isn't within those fields. And that's actually how I met Reed. It was just along that journey. And each person that you meet it does many different things. It informs your sensibility, which helps you curate what you're going to do. Mm-hmm. It helps you understand whether the idea has been done before or has relevance. It helps you understand whether the idea that you're going to turn into a movie or a television show or a documentary will sustain your interest. It has so many different values to it. And so a lot of the ideas for the movies or television shows have come from this side discipline of mine of going to meet new people. So 8 Mile wouldn't have existed had I not met Andy Warhol. Had I not went and met Andy Warhol, I would have not met a photographer named Glenn E. Friedman, who was in the process of making a book was called Fuck You Heroes. And in Fuck You Heroes they showed pictures of the board culture and of hip hop. And because of my exposure, I mean, I'm really kind of synthesizing, but because of my exposure to this book and to Glenn Friedman, I went off and I met Chuck D, then Slick Rick, then Dr. Dre, then Eminem, then 8 Mile came about. Because 8 Mile came about, I learned more about that world, and then I met Frank Lucas, and Frank Lucas got me to make the movie American Gangster, and on and on and on. And so each one of these curiosities, I'm trying to bring some structure to it, they're their own little trees. So that would have been a tree that lives in the world of the art form. But I've also met CIA directors, which helped sensitize me to, I start off with Edward Teller, who got me to meet William Casey, which led me on and on and on, which sensitized me to, Black Op missions, CIA, what bureaucracies look like within our government, and it sensitized me and made me excited about 24 and having a Jack Bauer type character that there was an empowerment person so that he could actually cut through red tape. So each one of these meetings sort of influences something else, and they live within this whole scope of a fabric that is all intertwined.
I love the idea that each one of these people that you meet does lead to something along the way. Reed, as you were working through Netflix over the 15 years before it kind of hit that streaming magic, who are the people that you hit along the way, that people kind of open up doors for you or made you look at things in a different way? Or who are some of those key relationships?
One of the most fun evenings I had was in probably 2007, and Chad Hurley and I were invited to some mucky muck thing in New York, and we were both rejected from going into the meeting place because we both had jeans on. And so we said, screw it, let's go have dinner. And so we had this great couple-hour dinner figuring out kind of streaming and how it presented this on-demand experience. And, it was just a magical coincidence.
So that's the key, is don't be afraid to wear jeans.
There we go.
That's right. What do you think, when you look at, what do you think has been the biggest impact that Netflix has had on the industry right now?
Well, I think broadly it's not just Netflix, it's on-demand streaming. Again, if you think about the broadcast networks, there was 3 and then 4 major broadcast networks, and that was it. That was basically, if you were a storyteller, that's all the distribution you had.
Right.
And it was very controlled and stifling. And then cable networks, HBO and CNN and Discovery, FX, AMC, they just opened up tremendous amounts more storytelling. Much more gets produced, and it's much better than it was 40 years ago.
That's right.
And we see a similar explosion in creativity with internet distribution. And so the two sides, distribution effectiveness and efficiency, and the creative side linked together, because it's easier to watch as there's more distribution, then there's more stories that get told, and in new and creative ways. So, we're right at that beginning of that era, with YouTube, with Netflix and Hulu and many other companies.
Yeah, one of the things that I think happened, it changed my life. The fact there was a real democratization of cinema, where suddenly cameras got cheaper, the ability to edit movies got cheaper, suddenly the quality got big enough to where anybody with a camera and a computer and a good idea could make a movie. Like that democratization was one big, I think, turning point. And then this access to digital distribution, where now suddenly anybody can put a movie out or put content out for people to see. What's the next revolution? What's the next thing that's going to happen? Because I think that now I guess the question is, once I put it out there, now how do you drive people to it, to get them to know about it, to see it, without having millions of dollars?
Because I've gone through different, for 25 or 30 years, I've been telling stories in different narrative forms, and the hardware side has always changed. But ultimately, I would tell people that I'm in the feelings business. I'm not in the movies business or the television business. Ultimately, I'm just only in the feelings business. And so whatever the story is, whatever the genre is, you have to ignite something within that narrative form that creates a feeling. So I would argue that Rocky is not about boxing. It's transcendent of boxing. It becomes a universal and emotional feeling that everybody can relate to. And some of the movies that I've made have also fallen into that category. So when I did A Beautiful Mind, it wasn't really about schizophrenia. It was about something more than that, and it reached you on some profound level that's transcendent of a movie about schizophrenia. So I think ultimately that's the differentiator. And if I just have to, a quick shout out to GoPro, that's the most amazing cinematic tool of all time. It really, it really is, because it will heighten. It gets you inside the first person. It gets you inside how a person is going to feel in any one of these situations, whether it's a sporting event, whatever the situation is, and it heightens that experience, and it does it for a lot less money, and it does it in a more intimate basis. So I couldn't be more excited about that as a cinematic tool. So I think ultimately that's the differentiator, is how do you reach people? How does it explode into something atomic that becomes something that everybody talks about?
Yeah. You want to add on to that?
One of the big changes I think we'll see is a lot more global interconnectivity because of the internet, relative to prior TV show and distribution network. If you look at the major cable networks, they're almost always national only,
right?
Whereas the internet, is much more global. And so we'll see a lot of, great content from around the world increase its viewing, and great content from the U.S. spread around. And that's just a positive globalization effect that the internet is bringing.
I'd like to talk to you guys. You're both incredibly philanthropic individuals. Both of you are highly passionate about giving back. Talk about the importance of that, especially once you reach a certain level of success.
Well, let me address it two ways. One is, I hope through some of the subjects that I do in movies that it enriches your soul in some way that enriches your soul.
Yeah.
Because I try to make movies that, I've never made a horror film. I shouldn't have even said that. But you said don't say something stupid. So it's really not about that. It's just about completing yourself as a person.
Yeah. And what does that mean? What does that mean as a producer for you, completing yourself as a person?
Well, I think that most movies that matter are about self-worth.
Yeah.
And because you have to get inside a person. And just a quick digression. I met a woman named Veronica de Negre. She was tortured in Chile 25 years ago. I met her through Sting. It just happened. I started to ask her questions about what it was like to be tortured. I was able to understand what it was like to survive torture. Having understood that, it enabled me to understand what Apollo 13 could be. Because I don't know anything about aerodynamics. I still barely know anything about space and aerodynamics and the hardware that's involved in that. But I do understand what it's like to be prepared and have something that enters your universe that causes a life or death situation, trying to get out of it. And I wouldn't have been sensitized to that had I not met Veronica de Negre. Having met Veronica de Negre, I also produced a film called Closetland, and I gave all of the proceeds to Amnesty. So all these different things sort of find their way into sort of a food chain. My personal thing is Best Buddies. I happen to like Best Buddies. And it's basically an organization, if this is the question you're asking, it's an organization that helps kids that are mentally disabled. It was started by Eunice Shriver in the Special Olympics. That was its foundational base. And it's just finding kids that want to help other kids in the way of reaching out and giving them an incoming phone call. And it's a bridge to that kid that is sitting in isolation and incapable of finding their way out of their house or to a movie theater into a socialized environment. Because that makes you feel relevant, makes you feel like you have meaning. It completes you as a human being. That's what movies are about. To me, that's what life is about. And currently I'm writing a book about how to bring structure to curiosity. And I sort of stumbled across this feeling, and that I don't really think I think it's difficult to have intimacy without curiosity. And I think without intimacy, I don't think you can have connection. And I think connection is the most important thing to have for us as human beings.
Yeah. Reed.
There's 1,000 interesting and hard problems to work on in helping society move forward, whether that's, hunger or violence or torture, tolerance, education. And I was a Peace Corps volunteer right after college, so 83 to 86, I was in Swaziland teaching high school math, and I loved it, and it gave me a special love of the classroom. And so, as I've been successful in business, that's where I put my philanthropic efforts, is towards K-12 education. Two primary fronts, the technology aspect, like Khan Academy, Dreambox Learning, these things. Yeah. Because ultimately, I think software is what's going to allow us, we need every kid in Pakistan, every kid in Nigeria, every kid in Brazil to get a great education and really participate in the global economy. And software is what's going to enable that. And then I work on the political side in the U.S. on a reform called charter schools that allow teachers to form their own schools as a nonprofit and run independently of school districts. And that's been very successful.
Great. Let's have a nice round of applause for our two guests, ladies and gentlemen. Brian Grazer, Reed Hastings.